the recent research being done up at Salt Lake City, I've learned in the last couple months, they have a basketball-sized device that can teleport and travel, anti-grav, but also they hit a certain resonant frequency and bang, the laboratory filled up with these interdimensional beings that were visible. They were videotaped. I'm trying to get my hand on the videotape from a National Security Agency contact I have, but that's just in the last, since March, April. And that's being done in a private lab, privately funded. What that lab doesn't know is that they were doing it in classified U.S. government-supported, unacknowledged special access labs in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Okay? You gotta understand this stuff. You're not going to know what's going to happen, what's coming, unless you do. Then there are these little lovely experiences, psychotronically induced experiences, with AI and also holographic man-made beings, thought forms. So this is in a whole basket of technologies. And about 1956, I met with a man who was, back in 93, 94, was in his 80s. And he was sort of a very much an electromagnetic genius prodigy back then. And he developed a system, two couple systems. One was a TAC system, technology-assisted consciousness system, where you could switch it on, hook yourself up to sort of like a headset, and go into a remote view state and see any place you wanted to. That was 56. A front company for the CIA called Alphametric Corporation bought it up and black-shelled it and put it into their unacknowledged exclusive use for certain highly classified. And I'm not talking Ed Dames type stuff. I mean, way past what Ed was exposed to. So those systems were 50s, 56, 57, 58. He also said that they had technologies where at a remote distance they could target somebody, and this is thousands of miles away if they wished, and give them an experience with a being that 100% would seem real. It's almost like electromagnetic LSD or electromagnetic ayahuasca, but controlled by the intelligence community. So that, and he said, and I'm quoting here, he said, if we want to target someone so that they have a personal conversation with their personal God, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, whoever it is, they'll have it, they'll think it's real, and they will absolutely pass a lie detector test that it's real. That's 50s. 60-some years ago. You got to get your mind around that in order to understand people with the intent to deceive have in their collection of tools extraordinary sciences and technologies that are classified. Now, if I had heard this stuff from one person with credentials, I would have questioned it, but it's from dozens and dozens and dozens of people who've been in these companies and in these agencies. A lot of the really high-end work of that is being done in we'll go through a list, E-Systems, Raytheon, EG&G, et cetera, and so on. So that's what you have to understand. And, you know, and the comical term that's used at the CIA by the people I know there currently is WSFM, weird science and frickin' magic. But at Lockheed Martin, at Northrop Grumman, they just call it PFM, pure effing magic. That's what the engineers call it. It just absolutely looks like magic. So that is what we're dealing with. Now let's go to the next slide. And we're going to get into more detail. Is this too much? Are you following? Yeah? Well, there'll be time for question later. So when you look at the covert intelligence community's USAPs, you have to divide them into two general areas. You have advanced physics, and these are things that you can think of that are very 3D, 4D, ARVs, electromagnetic devices, programmed life forms that are robotic creatures that are bio-nano genetics. By the way, the state-of-the-art lab for that is Dulce. Cannot get to it by being anywhere near Dulce. There's a connector from Los Alamos underground and also some other UGVs. We'll get into that in a moment, where the underground system is connected. But these are the ones that are really where the action is, trans-dimensional physics, both passive and active. Now, the reason I divide these into passive and active systems is that the passive systems are for intelligence gathering and spycraft. The active systems are for disruption and staging things. Does that make sense? So as we look at these passive systems, you're looking at the sort of things that if you were to develop electromagnetic interdimensional spycraft, and it's way past PRISM or the Monroe Institute. When I say way past, way past. PRISM was the Snowden revealed NSA eavesdropping thing. Those are using electromagnetic linear. And these are systems that, as I mentioned, have electromagnetic-assisted remote viewing into the conscious realm. And those allow spycraft to take place free of any tap or electromagnetic monitoring of telecommunication, what's called signals intelligence. Not necessary. And this is why everyone who works with me, when they first start working with me, they go, oh, we need to send everything encrypted, and we need this. And I said, don't bother. By the time the thought has left your cerebral cortex, it's been grabbed by these technologies. Now, one of my military advisors for many years was a naval commander, and he, back when the White Oaks Naval Facility was operative, it's closed now in Maryland, he saw a device that was called a white noise space-time electromagnetic extraction system. And what that was is that it was a device that could target anywhere, any volume of space, say the volume in this room, and say the device is there near Bethesda in Maryland. They could target the volume of this room and monitor anything going on now or that happened here last night, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago, 1,000,000,000 years ago. It's called the white noise of space-time. The mystics call it the Akashic record. So encoded within the fabric of space-time is everything that has ever happened is still there as a standing energy waveform that can be extracted by this system. And that was in the 70s, and it had been fully operational long before he got there. Called the white noise space-time extraction. Okay, do you understand what that is? So yeah, so it can target it, but it's actually pulling events and information and intelligence out of the structure of space-time and can target any volume anywhere. So this is why I say, Snowden, I told his lawyers, don't, he made a very big mistake disclosing lame stuff like PRISM and the conventional NSA fiber optic going into Google and Facebook. The big action is this stuff. And that's why anyone who wants to work with me, I say, forget about encryption. Forget about secrecy. Ain't going to work, because if you had $1 trillion, you couldn't frustrate these systems. Now, and then there are others that have been developed or they're trying to develop, so-called Project Red Light. That's based on studying extraterrestrial communication devices that can also look into the future or get a sense of future events. Those are in development and are less precise, but that's only because all future events are only probabilities. So let me explain what I mean by that. Everything that we think and do at this moment is changing the future. And so if in this point in time you see an event in the future, by the time you've seen it, if you've shared that information, it can change that event. Does this make sense? So now, it may have a 95% likelihood, it may have a 99%, it may be a 80%, but it's not going to be 100%. The ones looking in the real time now or backward, like the white noise extraction systems, those are extremely accurate. Okay, so those are all passive systems that, and there are many others, that have been developed since the 50s, 60s, 70s. Certainly by the 60s and 70s, these were all fully operational. Okay, so you're not going to learn this in your physics class or your government class at the college here, but you'll learn it today, and I'm telling you the truth. Now, these are worrisome just because they're very unacknowledged special access project spy systems. These are where my bigger concern is. And these active transdimensional systems deal with the ability to perturb or induce phenomenon from other realms and dimensions. I mentioned that a moment ago, where they could set up an electromagnetic vector into another dimension and cause a phenomenon to take place that would not only fool everyone, but could be very injurious to the Earth. One of these systems, I've been told, recently has been deployed in the past to be set up over certain tectonic fault lines to induce earthquakes and earth changes. And these are actively being deployed. Very dangerous game being played. This is why these events coming are going to be not just natural, but man-made and natural. Keep that in mind as things start unfolding. They're in the hands of some of the worst elements possible, which is why I said 25 years ago the disclosure of this subject and getting these technologies under the control of conscious, ethical people is of the utmost importance to the human future, and it is an existential crisis that it is in the hands of the people it's in. They have had the ability to do teleportation since the 50s, maybe 40s. You've all heard the Philadelphia experiment. It wasn't actually in Philadelphia, it was in Rhode Island. But that was a cover story. But the long story short is the ability to cause an object to switch and fall out of one point in space and appear at another. That has been done fairly recently with particles in physics. It's been reported in mainstream physics journals. But what you need to know is through very high voltage and electromagnetic frequency field systems, it began to be studied and practiced and experimented with in the 40s and 50s. One of our disclosure project witnesses, Fred Threadfell, was up at a base up in Canada that was a classified Air Force facility where they had this big room, and it sounds so prosaic, but they had an ashtray. And the ashtray would be on a box, and it had this electromagnetic field, and it would dematerialize and rematerialize on another part of the base, and they could just teleport it back and forth. An ashtray. That was in 1953. So these sort of sciences, trans-dimensional physics and sciences, have been developed over the last 60, 70 years. At this point in 2018, they're extraordinarily well developed in the classified world, and they can stage pretty much anything they want, which is what they're doing. It also means they can materialize and dematerialize objects. They can weaponize these interdimensional portals, or so-called stargates. Now, this is the thing that is most concerning to me, is that all interstellar extraterrestrial civilization are crossing through these finer dimensions to get here. They're not going through linear solid space-time. But over the last 30, 40 years, they've developed the ability to weaponize, say, a vector or a portal into these other dimensions and then create a weapon system that can target other starcraft, other planetary systems, and what have you. This is very dangerous in the hands of people who have the intention to utilize them. And this is of great concern to all of us. The other are the satellite-based systems. Back in the 70s, I met the man who was a very brilliant electromagnetic engineer, had his own company in the Tampa, St. Pete area, who had developed what he called a neutrino light detector. These are detectors that are placed on satellites that can pick up an ET craft when it's coming out of interdimensional, transdimensional space-time into this dimension, and it leaves a certain signature. And it's not conventional light. It's a neutrino kind of light scatter, but in the shape and form and vector of the spacecraft. That is then slaved, as they call, to weapon systems that are both in space on satellites and on the ground to target the ET craft and hit it with a very powerful electromagnetic weapon, which is how we've been causing these crash retrieval events to happen. Though you're not going through billions of miles or light years of space and getting here and running out of gas and crashing. I mean, or an electrical storm. They don't know how to maneuver through an 737s can go around electrical storms. They're being targeted with these weapons that are faster than the speed of light because they are what are called scalar or longitudinal. So a quick study in that. Wave, like light you're seeing, has a wave function, right? So the wave function, it's 186,000 miles per second propagating. Scalar or longitudinal, it's a point in a line, and it doesn't have a wave function, and it is multiples of the speed of light. Those scalar systems or longitudinal systems have been developed since the 40s, 50s, 60s, and have been weaponized. That was what was in the little secret radar dome. The FBI memo that we got has now become the #1 viewed document on the FBI website, from the field agent to J. Edgar Hoover about the Roswell event, where it says apparently they switched on a, quote, new radar system, and these things crashed. It wasn't radar the way you think of radar at Denver International Airport. That term radar, just so you know, is a euphemism used in unacknowledged special access projects to denote these sort of specialized pulsed electromagnetic weapon systems. And they call them radar. It's a euphemism. So these have been developed and were deployed in the 70s. There were systems in the 60s that were present in space, but they weren't as accurate because they didn't have these very subtle neutrino light detectors on them. And of course, then you have the land, air, and sea-based systems that aren't in space that have these interdimensional and scalar electromagnetic weapons. A good example would be near Eglin Air Force Base. There's an area of beach there that's classified, and they have these big horseshoe-shaped objects that are connected to satellite tracking systems. And when they have picked up ET craft coming in, they'll switch it on and hit it with the equivalent of something much more powerful than an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, like you'd get from a nuclear weapon, but it's very directional, and it will disable the ET craft, and it'll drop straight out of the sky into the Gulf, and they'll go and retrieve it. I know people who've been on those retrieval teams. What? Yeah. You now understand why the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the 3-star general I met with, in the first 10 minutes said, "Dr. Greer, we don't know why you haven't committed suicide yet." That was his first question. Why haven't you? And then there are the mind-conscious interface weapons. These are ones, that get into radionic psychotronic disruptors. Very worrisome, because if you take, the concept of technology interfacing with mind and consciousness, and you were to weaponize it, then you can create a system that not only gathers intelligence, but disrupts people's function or level of consciousness, or can induce, as I mentioned earlier, hallucinogenic abduction states. But also, importantly, can disrupt amity, can disrupt relationships. There was a woman back in 93 or 94 who I met with for about a week, who had worked in one of these corporations. And she says, look, we have devices, and we can turn a dial, target a board meeting in New York City, and have the board come to the decision we want them to come to. Or we can turn the dial the other way. Everyone in the room is fighting with each other, hating each other. The egos come out. And these are very well-developed systems. Sounds like tinfoil hat stuff. And that's what they want you to believe. But those systems have been fully operational also since the 50s and 60s. So this is just sort of a quick overview of the constellation of types of technologies. I think you're getting the gist of this. Everything you've learned is wrong about this subject. Most of it is stagecraft. You have to have this information to go to the next level of what you need to do, and that's to become an interplanetary ambassador to these civilizations. Because I don't think it's going to happen out of the U.S. State Department or the UN anytime soon. And it is very important that you not give any power to this, but you have to be aware of it. And what do I mean by that? The consciousness within us and the central sun of reality, that state of conscious being, that's so much more powerful than these toys. But you have to access that state to frustrate them. It's just being a Shambhala warrior, spirit warrior. You have to understand the power of the consciousness within you. And the conscious mind that you're awake with right now is actually seamlessly integrated to the unbounded infinite mind of the great being at all times, in all places. So you can connect to that, transcend your own ego and individuality and fear and intellect, and connect to that, and that is the ultimate protection. But it's also the ultimate source of guidance, wisdom, discernment. That's why I said it was a very good thing I became a meditation teacher and a student of the Vedas and the cities and what have you before I got involved with this, because otherwise I would have been lost for sure, probably killed too. So this is very important for you to understand as a sort of milieu, sort of the prevailing environment that is extant. It's out there, it's operational, it's fully operational, and it's being deployed all the time. It's the stock and trade of most things ufological. So I think we have to begin to, and I had someone say to me once, "Boy, you're really a skeptic about most." I said, "No, it's not a skepticism. It's about knowledge. I've known all of this since the early and mid-90s. Terrible. Well, and of course, what do you do when you're meeting with a politician? And I had dinner night before last before I flew out here with one of the main editor of Politico and a former ambassador under Bill Clinton and some people in D.C. I have a home in D.C. and I meet with a lot of these kind of folks. And you're trying to bring them up to ET and UFO 101, that they even exist. But they need to know this. But they don't. And it's a huge learning curve. It's vertical. And all of us have got to go through this learning curve very quickly so we don't get fooled again. Imagine this constellation of technologies being deployed to simulate an alien attack, simulate abductions, mutilations, and as Dr. Altshuler, who is a wonderful man who lived here in Denver, I'd stay at his home, and he was remember the Snippy the horse, the original mutilated animal thing? That was him. That was the doctor who researched that in the late 68 or something. He says, I discovered those were covert paramilitary programs doing those back in the late 60s. Nobody would listen. I said, of course they are. We know how they're doing it and why they're doing it. It's really funny. Everyone says, the aliens are mutilating the cattle. I said, yeah, right. I know exactly who's doing it, where they're doing it, where they're operating out of, what technologies they're using, and they've been doing it since the 60s. Now, to the hysterical public, the aliens are mutilating our cattle and women folk, and they're doing this and they're doing that. I'm going, yeah, well, they're alien, but they're not extraterrestrial. Go back to the previous slide, and you'll see alien is a catch-all. So what part of this is extraterrestrial? What part of it is interdimensional? What part of it innately interdimensional, and what part of it is man-made simulators using very advanced technologies that, who knows how many trillions of dollars, at least $8 trillion in one Michigan State University study recently, $21 trillion in covert money have gone into. Our entire national debt, by the way, would be all set if we could claw back the $21 trillion that have been embezzled into these projects. Yeah. So it's a lot of money. And with it comes a lot of technology and a lot of brilliant people. The smartest people I have ever met on this planet that are not ET have been people who have been identified in high school and college and pulled into a USAP, Unacknowledged Special Access Project. IQ's 200 and north. I mean, just geniuses. And what a waste. Because they're spending their lives working for these fascists who have an agenda of World War III being interplanetary, just as Wernher von Braun warned on his deathbed. So if you take all of this in the aggregate and realize that people say, when is the false flag going to happen? I said, well, that started in the 50s. The false flag operators started in the 50s when they developed alien reproduction vehicles, gravity control, then started doing stagecraft simulating ET encounters that scared people, et cetera and so on, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, till now. It's all been part of an acculturation and brainwashing and counterintelligence so that people, when they're ready to hit the button, bang, would say, we'll be convinced that whatever that is an actual hostile alien invasion. That's the basis of it. Now, you've all heard that President Trump recently called for the formation of a space force. And, all right, now, wait. I'm a little long in the tooth, or getting old. I'll be 63 next week. Terrifying idea. Imagine having me as a grandfather. Anyway, doing, but it's a frightening thought that, or father for that matter. But, you know, the Space Force, what he's really doing is acknowledging something that already exists. All right. Whether he knows that or not, I don't know. I doubt it. The people, the men and women I have dealt with for the last 25 or more years who've been in these projects have been in an operational command, Space Command and elsewhere, that have satellite systems first deployed in the 60s that could target ET craft and have been refined and refined and refined. We're on like the 200th generation, I don't know, of refinement of those technologies over the last 60 years, 50 to 60 years. But those exist already. Now, of course, what he wants to do is form a sixth branch of the acknowledged branch. And what I'm concerned about is the people who are maneuvering him to do so are people who are getting ready for this false flag threat alien invasion thing that, of course, we were warned about by Wernher von Braun in the 70s, and nobody listened. But I think that's an open preparation. I don't think that he's read into this. So let me explain what presidential intelligence briefings, at least to the extent I've been involved since Papa Bush in 91, 2, and Clinton onwards, is that the people who are read in heavily are people who came into the presidency or vice presidency, the case of Papa Bush or Cheney, from the committee, who had come along through their careers. But most presidents, say Bill Clinton. Bubba came in as a governor from Arkansas. He wanted to be read into this, was denied access. His CIA director was denied access. Subsequently, he was kind of told, leave this alone, and when you're an ex-president, we'll read you in, which is what happened. They didn't trust him in the Oval Office having the information, in other words. His CIA director that I briefed ended up betraying everyone, getting a position with Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a big contractor that deals with this and other things, and took sort of the golden parachute. Most people, if they're threatened enough, or if they're given enough inducements, or both, usually it's both, will take the buyout. In 92, the head of Army Intelligence offered me personally $2 billion with a B dollars to defect. I wouldn't do it. So it's most people are going to take the $2 billion. You know. But I think, I always say, what all this boils down to is integrity, and courage. And you got to have both. And the courage is a lot to ask for from a politician. Never mind integrity. But they know that. The people who are on the Majority Intelligence Committee that handles all this, there are dozens and dozens of unacknowledged special access projects that deal with this. They are sort of silos. For example, the gentleman who recently came forward, he was given baseline clearance, it's called, across 18 of them. But out of 6,000 people, there were only 3 people that had baseline clearance across them. So they're usually very, very compartmented, isolated. One of the things that he shared with me, which was very interesting, is the fact that there's a facility near Lawton, Oklahoma, near Fort Sill, where there's an underground base that has these, one of the spacecraft that was downed apparently in the 80s or 90s, that is being studied to figure out how it cloaks. And he has seen that facility. There's also a facility that where we downed an ET craft outside Seoul, South Korea, and they had to bore a huge facility into a mountain, and there's an ET craft there. There's a facility in Irvine, California, that looks like an office park, but you go way underground, and there's a facility where they're studying the extraterrestrial bodies. There's all kinds of facilities and operations, some of which I knew about and some I did not. And what was fascinating to me is that this man had been in the Army as a career person, retired, and then got rehired as a civilian, and then, and only then, was read into these projects, and he didn't even know what an unacknowledged special access project was. But when he saw this movie, he went, this man knows what he's talking about. So he was pulled into what's called the TMO, Technology Management Office of the Pentagon. Let's go to the next slide. And this is a couple of this is by no means comprehensive. I just wanted to give you an idea of where some of these facilities are and, kind of where they're, how they're structured. There's an entire Edwards base and related facilities on the left here, Edwards Air Force Base in the high desert of California. And you have these various, Haystack Butte is a specific place that has an underground facility underneath that, China Lakes. George Norton has been decommissioned, Tabletop Mountain, and Blackjack Control. Interesting, Blackjack Control is at Edwards. The top secret document that's the National Reconnaissance Office, which is the office that runs all the super secret spy satellites, mentions Blackjack operation, but Blackjack Control, and that's out of Nellis, so-called Area 51, although it's not really called Area 51. But Blackjack Control is actually at the Edwards facility. Now, what you need to know is that you can go into an underground connector at Edwards, and I know people who have done this in their jobs, connect to an underground tunneling system and surface at Nellis. All right? So Bing. Bechtel Corporation, I've mentioned, there's a nuclear-powered tunneling device that bores through solid bedrock and glassifies it, and then they put these high-speed electromagnetic transport systems in so people can go underneath the surface of the Earth at one point and appear at another point in the continental United States. It was sort of honeycombed with a number of these tunnels and underground facilities. One thing to keep in mind, nothing that is mission critical is on the surface of the Earth. It is either underground or in space. If it's above a nuclear blast zone, surface of the Earth, or an asteroid hit level of the surface of the Earth, it is not critical. or if it's critical, it's got a mirror facility underground. That's what the COG is, continuity of government. You know what that is? COG? No. You know, if a nuclear weapon went off and took out the whole government in Washington, there's a continuously running system. It used to be in Mount Weather, and it's near there now. And actually on 9/11, Senator John Warner, who's on this committee of the Majority Intelligence Committee, was taken by intelligence community agents and taken into an underground connector under the Capitol and whisked out to Mount Weather on an underground system on 9/11 because he was a critical asset. I mean, the rest of the senators weren't, but a couple, but the ones who were on the committee. And then you have aerospace facilities that are at Edwards. You have the Northrop's Ant Hill, Teton Ranch, McDonnell Douglas Llano plant, Lockheed Martin Hellendale plant, Phillips Lab. These are all facilities where ARVs, so-called alien reproduction vehicle, man-made flying saucers and triangles are made. You all have heard of the Nellis complex. It's called Area 51, but it's actually areas S4, S12. Pahut Mesa and Area 19 are key. Pahut Mesa is a mesa, and underneath is where the state-of-the-art research lab is studying extraterrestrial materials are located, and Groom Lake, the test range out on that Area 51 site. It's really called the Nevada Test Range. In New Mexico, you have Los Alamos National Laboratories. They have a compartmented operation that deals with this, but more importantly, a member of my team for many years was a senior engineer at Los Alamos, and he was in the locker room, and he was hearing some men talk about the fact they had just come back out of Dulce through the underground connector. So Los Alamos has an underground connector system to the Four Corners area. Now, a lot of people have gone there, like UFO hunters, and they go, there's nothing there on the ground. Well, no, there isn't. There's no egress, there's no access, there's no regress. It's all through underground elsewhere. But it's in that area. And that's where a lot of the PLFs are made, programmed life forms, the so-called aliens, the ones that are running around. It's where we grow them, is out there. Which is why they were getting a lot of the raw materials from all the cattle they were mutilating in northern New Mexico. You know this story? Oh, well, we could go on for days. But anyway, so that's the Los Alamos and Dulce complexes. You have Kirkland Air Force Base, of course, has had a historic connection, but Sandia National Lab specifically has studied this issue, and the Phillips Lab facility, Manzano Mountain Weapons Storage Facility is underground, Coyote Canyon Test Site, and then, of course, White Sands is actually a separate New Mexico facility. White Sands is its own facility, quite far away from Kirkland. That was graphic was a little mistake in there. Go to the next slide, and I'll show you some more. Is this interesting to spy on all these? In Arizona, I've had some people, a couple people, a recent man just contacted us who had worked at that facility. Years ago, a gentleman who had been in the underground facility there had worked in the compartmented operation where there were 9 separate ET spacecraft that over the years had been taken there, and then they had an underground morgue for all the ET bodies, all the ETs that we had, of course, killed, and were in storage there. So that Fort Huachuca is actually also an NSA facility in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. It's near Tombstone, ironically. All these dead ETs and craft there. It's also Army Intelligence Headquarters. It's at Fort Huachuca, way out in the desert. And there are others, of course, out in this Cheyenne Mountain. The Colorado Deep Space Network here in Colorado has a significant research. And there's an Air Force base connected underground out further east. I'm blocking on the name. Yeah. Schroeder, that is very connected to this program. You have the Lawrence Livermore Labs in California, Pine Gap facility in Australia. They're both magic and Australian, but it's really run by U.S. I was at a briefing with 120 world leaders on an island in the Great Barrier Reef about 5 years ago, and this Minister of Defense for Australia was there, and he was very curious. Because the mistake people make is that, oh, he's the Minister of Defense of Australia, he'd know everything going on in his backyard. And no, he doesn't. Because these are unacknowledged special access projects that he was not read into. So it was a very interesting series of conversations. And by the way, it's very disturbing. I mean, if you're the Minister of Defense or the President or Prime Minister or CIA Director, and you find out that there's this enormous and most important technological and strategic activity in the history of the human race going on that you're not read into, you're pissed off, but you're scared. It's frightening, and it is frightening. Now, the Redstone Arsenal, there's a facility there in Alabama associated with the transdimensional research. I've been in one of the labs there, a SCIF, a Secure Communication Information Facility, SCIF. And there are amazing technologies that are being developed there, as well as associated with the Marshall Space Flight Center. The gentleman who's recently surfaced from the Technology Management Office in the sub-basement of the Pentagon said that he went down the Marshall Space Flight Center in this area and was read into the state-of-the-art killer satellite systems that had been put into space that could, and he used the word, obliterate anything in space. And it's very worrisome. Of course, it violates all kinds of treaties, but these are illegal, unacknowledged special access projects. They don't care what the law is. And then you have the Utah complex, not far from Salt Lake City. It's accessible only by air. Dugway Proving Grounds outside Provo has also classified airspace. And underneath Dugway is, I think, probably the most state-of-the-art facility, more so than so-called Area 51 or Edwards, which are older facilities. It also happens to be where the new NSA data center was built. You see this big gleaming multi-hundred-million-dollar building above ground, but there's a lot beneath ground. And of course, here you get, just a list of the alphabet soup of agencies involved. Air Force, CIA, DARPA, Defense Intelligence. DARPA is Defense Advanced Research Project Administration, FBI. All branches of the military have various divisions dealing with this. Probably the crown jewel is ONI, also Naval Intelligence and Navy. Earth is 2/3 covered with water, yeah? And we have a lot of assets that are underwater and that are doing things under the oceans connected to ET, and also our own underwater UFOs that are man-made that zip around. NASA has a very compartmented division that deals with this, and the National Reconnaissance Office I mentioned before, they are tasked with all the top secret satellites, but the compartment that deals with this issue would also have the killer satellites and ones with the neutrino light detectors and the weapon systems on them. Of course, the National Security Agency has some compartmented operations dealing with this, and the various space commands, which have now, of course, Trump's calling for the Space Force. The Technology Management Office in the sub-basement of the Pentagon's been around for a long time. It's way deep underneath the Pentagon. It's an unacknowledged area. There's a facility here in Irvine near I-5 and Forest Lakes Boulevard. It looks like an office park, and that's where there's a big underground research facility for the ET bodies. And I mentioned this underground base near Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where there's an ET craft being studied for its cloaking or materialization, dematerialization abilities. And then I mentioned before Seoul, South Korea. The Research Triangle Park in North Carolina has an Army Science Research Center there, Dr. Rayburn Scott and others. What's interesting about that is that, people don't realize that the Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, is the highest number of PhDs anywhere in the world. And there are a lot of classified facilities in that area, in my home state. And I mentioned the NRO neutrino lights, and there are many others. So one of the things that I try to, as I go through all of that, and you get your minds around it, is is to understand that it's decentralized, it's compartmented, but it's also very scattered into different fiefdoms. So you have a naval fiefdom, and you have an Air Force fiefdom, you have a CIA, and they don't always get along at all right? And then you have, let's go to the next slide, the corporate fiefdoms, sort of feudal warlords. And this is where you get into, of course, a whole lot of companies that you've heard of, some you may not have. BAE Systems, this is British, but they are very involved. BDM Corporation, Bechtel does a lot of the underground base and contracting for these facilities, construction. I actually have met Stephen Bechtel years ago. Booz Allen Hamilton, that's who the contractor was that Snowden worked for. And then CIA Director Woolsey that I had briefed ended up becoming counsel for. But they are very involved in the ET research area. Boeing has a compartmented operation. EG&G, which has a plant on the edge of the Nellis Range. They do a lot of in fact, the early anti-gravity craft that we built that were man-made were EG&G. This one. E-Systems, which is now part of Raytheon. The brothers, I knew the executives at E-Systems, and they were telling me about the kind of technologies they had that had to do with these electromagnetic weapon systems and mental interface and all kinds of transdimensional systems. And the two brothers that had founded E-Systems were not getting along, and so rather than let that split apart and have the box open up to the public, Raytheon bought them. Lockheed Martin, they have various facilities, including in the Denver Research Center here, has a component that deals with the extraterrestrial research. It's compartmented. McDonnell Douglas has become part of Boeing. MITRE Corporation, North American Rockwell, Northrop, Phillips Lab, Raytheon, TRW, and many others. All these corporations have a piece of the pie, and they get, for example, I know a man who was an auditor for the U.S. government looking into Northrop Grumman's books, and there was a huge amount of unaccounted for spending. And he was told, this is a need-to-know basis. You don't have a need-to-know, so he basically just rubber-stamped the accounting. So what happens is that the money is run a little bit like a mafia. Now, not on this list, and it could be another list, are affiliated criminal enterprises. Okay, call them ACEs. They're just affiliated criminal enterprises. And these ACEs are ones that deal with the movement of drugs around the world, weapons, arms merchants, things of this sort, so weapons of mass destruction, things like this. That's real. It's not a conspiracy theory. The day before I was going to brief the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I was asked to go to a meeting in Crystal City, right near the Pentagon, with a former member of Congress who was one of George Bush Sr.'s consigliares, one of his real advisors, but a man who also had, I should have had on this list, SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation. So he was an executive with SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation. And he told me, he said, "Do you realize how dangerous this group is?" I said, "Yeah, I'm quite aware of it." And he said, "Well, there's an army," this was back in 97, 21 years ago. There's an army of about 8,000 men that do nothing but move contraband and drugs around the world in classified airspace and classified aircraft. And we have already killed 2,000 of them, 1/4 of them, for minor suspected security breaches. He says, and this is why this guy had just retired and gone to France, this SAIC executive. But it creates an enormous cash flow because the global drug trade sort of rivals the oil trade, but except it's not on the books. So you have black money from the U.S. government that goes into these projects from every, not just the military intelligence, Homeland Security, CIA, but also from HUD, as Catherine Austin Fitts and others have described. But you also then have these ACEs, these affiliated criminal enterprises that are tied into these unacknowledged special access projects that create not only operational nexus with gangs and what have you, but also an enormous amount of revenue and income. Extremely dangerous. So he asked me, he said, aren't you concerned? I said, well, yes, I know about this already, and I know an investigator who had uncovered there in California. There was a Marine officer who had spotted at like 3 or 4 in the morning one of these covert flights coming into a base, and unfortunately saw that they were unloading large amounts of drugs, and he reported it and ended up being killed, made it look like a suicide. But I said, this was, I know this goes on and has been going on for decades, but it creates an enormous amount of untraceable black budget money. So those are even more shadowy than these outfits. And unfortunately, the public is, one of the reasons, in my opinion, as a public health concerned medical doctor, that drugs are illegal is that they want to maintain the monopoly from these criminal enterprises. Because every study has shown that criminalizing drugs of any kind is actually counterproductive, but of course it makes it very expensive and very exclusive for a certain criminal element, which would redound to the benefit of the darker end of this operation. So this is sort of a quick 2-hour trip through the classified world, the facilities. There's certainly much more information. The key takeaway here is the technologies that sound like, would look like magic that could deceive you and the public have been developed since the 40s and 50s. And so there's in the back of your mind, as things begin to unfold over the next months to a few years, keep that in mind at all times. Keep it in mind at all times. On the other hand, there are extraterrestrial civilizations that are observing this, but we have created a very big problem. And I don't often talk about this, but this is something that certainly those of you doing the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, which is our ambassador team that goes out and makes peaceful contact with these civilizations, needs to know this, is that these civilizations do want to interface with us, but they're likely to interface with us most in these other dimensions, because when they come into 3D, they are tracked, targeted, and hit. Now, we have had one almost disaster at Mount Shasta a few years ago, and we had a luminous light ship that was emerging up from the volcano towards us, and we all got up and were communicating with it, and suddenly we, from a very high altitude airborne craft, there was a burst of energy. Just before that, the ET craft dematerialized, but this energy crashed into the woods about 200 yards in front of us, ripping down all the trees, limbs, and you could hear it, and then it went into the earth, 15 seconds, shaking the earth. I was expecting to see a mushroom cloud. Nothing. It was a directional, scalar electromagnetic weapon. But so one of the things that has become a problem is that we're doing this as people wanting to move the planet forward into an era of universal peace and enlightenment, but within the context of all this rubbish. So let's call it the theater of operation. Earth is an armed camp. And so we have to do it with that in our mind. It doesn't stop us. And it most certainly doesn't stop these very advanced ET civilizations from interacting with us, because they can come in a trans-dimensional form and then materialize briefly and then dematerialize and then communicate with us for hours while we're sitting out in the desert Happens all the time. Every single week we go out anywhere. Amazing, but it ain't what you think. It's very advanced consciousness and also physics going on. And we'll have electromagnetic devices out there that we start, and we have cameras. You may have seen from the webinar last month that we did in Arizona of this ET being that appeared in our circle in Arizona about this time last year, and we have a great photograph of it. And all that was seen with the naked eye was a burst of sort of a red sphere. But a camera was open, the lens was open. And here is this ET, sort of triangular-shaped head, large, sort of a tunic on the chest, and appeared next to this man, an older gentleman who had had a permanent hearing loss for many years. And he continued to have contact with that ET all throughout the night. And the next morning he came crying into the session and said, "My hearing is totally normal." And it is still. So we have amazing experiences with these ETs that are actually very compassionate and very enlightened and really incredible civilizations. They get a bad rap because of what I call alienism, which is that slide where I showed all the things that are thought of as alien that are being man-made or not ET or other dimensions. But I tell people, if you enter into this state of consciousness, a deep meditative state, and connect to the great consciousness, the cosmic mind, there is such protection there. And there's such clarity there. And if your intent and your heart is, I hate to use the word pure, but if you have a clear and pure intent of why you're there, these civilizations will contact you. They're not interested in people who just are curious. And they're not interested in people who are wanting to get their technologies or shoot them down. And they're not interested in racists. Now, what do I mean by that? What has happened is the human roots of racism are very well known. It goes all the way back to the part of us that are monkeys, that organize into warring troops because one's a little different from the other. So this tribalism that has infected the human situation is sort of the original sin of humanity, where one group kills another and organizes against one another in what's called warfare, for one silly reason or another, religious, ethnic, racial, blah, 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 blah. This is now being deliberately exploited by the intelligence community through their technologies into what I call alienism, the new racism. This is not politically correct, well, I don't know, in some circles now, you never know, to be overtly racist or to be overtly homophobic or overtly misogynist or overtly anti-Semitic or whatever it is, but it is okay to be overtly alienism racist. And so the interplanetary racism is what they're developing to replace the planetary racism and tribalism. And that's being done very, very well, very carefully, through the UFO community, through the New Age community, through the media, through books, through movies, through what have you, and through their stagecraft. So we have to sort of step back, take a look at this and go, I wonder what's really going on here, and not get fooled again. With that, I want to emphasize, I am not saying that all civilizations from other star systems are happy with us. I would say they are quite unhappy. Not with the Earth and humanity per se, but with the direction the planet is going in. That's a big distinction. Because when we first started detonating atomic weapons and then developing these other classified, faster than the speed of light weapons and deploying them into space, this became an existential threat to them. To them. There are planetary systems out there that are interplanetary in their capabilities that don't even have a concept in their bioevolutionary track of war or murder. It's just not there, like we do from monkeys. So we have to understand that if you were to look through ET's eyes and step out into space and look at the last 150 years or 100 years of this planet, where we've gone from, muskets and what have you to thermonuclear weapons and other weapons, and now these USAPs that have these amazingly advanced but potentially interstellar reaching weapon systems, you could understand why they'd be less than amused. Now, this is not to say, don't conflate this as a simplistic statement. It means that there are civilizations out there that are providing a check and a balance. And also they have a plan, another whole plan that's called Plan B. And that is in the event that we cannot get this planet under control and moving on to a level 1 civilization, as Michikaku calls, a peaceful civilization that's not destroying its biosphere, that could be universally at peace on Earth and peace in space, then, and things fall apart here, then there would be the mission to planet Earth to help put it back together. So that's an active program, because it isn't known yet how this is going to play out. It's up to you and me, all of us on planet Earth. They're not going to do it for us. No way. This is in the hands of we, the people. Don't look to the president or the government or the UN. Look to yourselves and your communities of what you can do to create universal peace, make contact with these civilizations, educate each other, and do not a breakaway civilization, but an advanced new civilization that can emerge out of the nonsense of the current culture. That's what we have to see and create. All right? Thank you very much. Let's take about a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back with some Q&A.